All right, this is like really close up, but not gonna have you guys hang out here long. Gonna do the next part on turbine wheels. So it's going to start out little like mathematically kind of intense. We're not gonna do any of the math. There's no point in doing any of this. It's just to show where the things that we're going to be talking about exist inside the equation for the outputs. And then we're going to go from there to going over how that applies to your tow rig, your race car, any of that stuff. And it's going to leave a lot left on the table yet again because I can't make these super, super long, nor do I have enough free time per day to do this train going by. So we're going to move to the paper. Okay, so I'm going to try this and then flip the video over so it might look weird. So, turbine work equation and its practical use. So, the equation is pretty in depth, but we're just going to go over the things that are inputs in the equation. So, turbine work equals MCP times Tn, temperature in minus temperature out. Wt is turbine work, M with the dot on it, mass flow rate of the fluid and weight. Cp is specific heat at constant pressure. Tn and Tout is temperature in, temperature out. This equation reflects the direct relationship between the fluid's temp drop and the energy extracted. It assumes adiabatic flow. No heat is lost or gained in the system. No, this doesn't actually happen in real life, right? That's why their equations are estimates. The turbine efficiency, NT, must be considered in real-world applications, so the actual work output is reduced by efficiency losses, where turbine wheel actual times turbine wheel ideal. So that's your efficiency. So whatever your ideal is, you multiply by the efficiency to get your actual. So if it's a 70% efficient turbine, whatever output we get, you multiply by 0.70 to get your actual. Now we see in the temperature equation, mass is important because mass gets multiplied by what we have here. So changing the mass is a big part of how the turbine produces shaft work. And this is going to go ahead and solve why there's more to it than just pressure. But pressure is also extremely important because typically systems that make pressure really fast are the systems that are more responsive. And also we're concerned about pressure when it comes to making the system run right and extracting the most energy out of the turbine. Both are true. The work done can also be derived from the change in pressure, assuming isentropic flow, no entropy changes. Using the relationship between pressure, temp, and enthalpy, the equation is given as Wt equals mCp temperature in, or yeah, I want to say T is temperature in, times you have pressure out over pressure in. This is the specific heat ratio. 1 minus this times your mass. So now we have our pressures that are being considered in the equation. And the bigger the expansion ratio, the greater P out, the more P out is over P in, the more you have left over in this equation that will get then multiplied by what's outside the brackets. Both equations are interdependent because pressure ratios dictate temp changes and vice versa via the ideal gas laws. So what that means is the expanding of the gas or the compressing of the gas and follows mathematically very closely with one another when it comes to the temperature change in the gas. So you are able to use either equation to get to the end goal, right? So they're both they both play a role with one another. So we're going to do an example. Temperature in is a 1100 Kelvin, temperature out's 900 Kelvin. Pressure in is 3 MPa, pressure out's 1 MPa. The mass is 5 kilograms of gas a second. The specific heat produces, I think I don't know what J kg is. I didn't look it up. I should have, but remember, no one here is going to ever, more than likely, at least ever be using this. Specific heat ratio is 1.4, which means pretty much working with air. Turbine efficiency is 85%. So if you input these into the equation on the last page, that gives you 1,005 kilowatts of shaft power generated actual times 85%. Turbine efficiency gives us 854.25 kilowatts of shaft generation. So what that means is that we can power the compressor, because the compressor is a power absorber. It's consuming work, and the turbine's creating work. So as long as the compressor is absorbing less than that, it's in pretty good shape. When the compressor begins to absorb more than that, the shaft RPM will become stagnant. Pressure-based equation. So if we do the pressure-based equation, we're going to get a little bit different results because the way the mathematics works, it gets a little bit different. We get 1,059.19 kilowatts, and after 85%, we get 1,059.19 kilowatts after 85%. I'm not going to go too far in this. The difference due to non-ideal behavior is not accounted for in the temperature or in the pressure one. These are the mathematical equations, not modeling equations. Like, they're not complete modeling equations for a system. These are just the mathematical equations to show you how both your pressures matter to create shaft work and your mass matters to create shaft work in either one. So if we go ahead, I'm going to put in a chart because I wrote this into the AI the wrong way, and it did not rerun the new equations with the original one that was working here. So I'm going to put that in there. The new equations don't have the 3/1 expansion ratio. They have a 1/5 expansion ratio and a 2/5 expansion ratio. So if we look at if we change only the mass flow to double, so if we go from 5 kilograms, 5 kilograms a second to 10 kilograms a second with a 1/5 expansion ratio. So at 5 kilograms a second with a 1/5 expansion ratio, we have 620 kilowatts of shaft power. And if we double the mass to 10 kilograms a second, get 1,241.39 kilowatts. All right, that's a big jump through doubling the watt, or doubling the mass, right? The density is increased, or the weight of whatever's going through it's increased. And we're going to go over what would increase the weight, or how to get more gas to move through the turbine wheel, because I think a lot of people think that the turbine wheel is like always flowing perfectly, and it is not. It's a very turbulent system. Changing expansion ratio only, which is ER. Remember, at the 1/5 expansion ratio at 620.70 kilowatts at 5 kilograms a second at a 1/5 ER. This is just the pressure side. If we go from a 1/5 ER to a 2/5 ER expansion ratio at same 5 kilograms a second, the new kilowatts 1,227.81 kilowatts. So we can see that by increasing the pressure head of the nozzle without increasing the pressure after the nozzle, the gas transfer rate is accelerated to a point where the amount of energy moved through the turbine per moment of time has increased by a factor that increases the kilowatt generation. Pretty substantial amount. I hope that kind of makes sense. So, the good stuff. A larger area turbine housing. What is actually happening? So we're going to go over what's kind of happening right here. Turbines and compressors operate in non-ideal conditions most of the time, and the goal of the designers originally is to try and put those in the ideal condition most of the time. But then we go and add a tuner, we changed the RPM band of the engine, we double the fuel mass, all kinds of stuff, and then it's completely wrong. So it happens as expansion ratio increases and turbine speed increases. What will happen is, let's say this is our ideal entry angle of the gas. What I can see here is that it's going to overshoot called, say this is rotating this way. It's going to overshoot called the suction side of the blade, which is this side, and apply force to your pressure side of the blade. As the turbine speed increases and the gas speeds increase, what happens is the angle of reaction, this called, you can look it up, starts to flatten out. And inherently, you want to look at it flattening out as in it's going to apply more force to the pressure side, which it does. The catch-22 is it starts to overshoot the suction side real bad, and then it backflows. So this gas is going to come over this section, across this side, cause a massive pressure drop on the suction side, and it's going to turn around and go turbulent. So there's always some state of turbulence in a turbine blade. And the trade-off, if you attack straight down, so it's idling, if you attack straight down, the work done to the blades is pretty low, right? That's a non-ideal path that you're looking at, like an idling engine here. And as the pressure ahead of the stream increases without a change in the pressure post, what you get is it starts to stand or starts to lay down. And as it lays down, you start to apply more force to your blades, and you can do that up to the point where I said it goes flat. This is what the 6 centimeter does, right? It has a very, very aggressive angle of attack. The housing volute is very near the blade. So one, there's not a lot of a pre-expansion going on, as well as the angle of attack is extremely limited to what it can be. That being said, its response rate and transient traits are extremely, extremely fast, right? The thing makes boosted idle and it makes basically boost for free. The problem is it stops flowing very early on, because what happens, like I said, is we already start off flat. There's not a lot to go till we get flat. It eddies, and when it eddies, your space that's available for flowing gets smaller. So you kind of think of, if this whole area can be used to flow mass, which increases turbine work, we can only use this much of it, because this whole section over here is turbulent and pissed off. What a bigger turbine housing does is you have more pre-expansion, right? So if we make the outside of the volute farther away, pushes it out, and you have more pre-expansion, so you lower the expansion ratio because the gas is expanding more before it has to go through the nozzle, as well as you're getting the gas angle of reaction to stand back up. So more of this space can be used, and if we go and look back at our equations, if we can move more mass through the turbine blade channels per moment, then we can get the same shaft work. That's why the housings can get larger, and as the housings get larger, the boost to drive gets better. Same with, as the turbine wheel gets larger, the boost to drive gets better. Now, we all know the catch-22s to larger housings and larger turbine wheels. I don't know if we really need to get into that, but that's what's happening. And turbines can produce tremendous amounts of energy, and that's why it scales kind of weird. Eventually, the turbochargers start to get large enough where, in most applications, you almost always end up with more boost than drive. There's this kind of crossover point, and this is also has to take into account engine displacement stuff, but we're talking, light duty trucks and stuff like that, right? We're not trying to go off on tangents with industrial pumps, and no one's here, I don't think, is designing a system for a QSK 95 or an oil tanker. So this is all cars, trucks. There's just a point where the amount of power generation due to how much mass it can move at a certain expansion ratio becomes way more than it takes to rotate the compressor to hit certain pressure targets based off of engine displacement and RPM. And small turbine wheels tend to get limited fairly early on. One, their leverage arm from center out, so their ability to do shaft work, as well as their ability to move a certain amount of mass. Right, the smaller this space, the less you can move through it maximum before the speed of the gas through this space is at its sonic condition. And as we talked in our last episode, you cannot go any faster than the local speed of sound through a nozzle, blade channel, tube, at least for what we're doing. The energy required doesn't exist for this stuff. You get more pre-expansion, which lowers your expansion ratio, which lowers the work output from the blade, but it also lowers nozzle velocity, which may be helpful. And it increases the area of the turbine blade channel that is flowing, which is an increase in the mass moved per moment of time. So it's always a trade-off. Right? So smaller turbine housings tend to lay your angled reaction over sooner. You start using less of your blade channel to flow, so you're only using this much instead of using the whole thing. Larger turbine housings tend to allow the angle of reaction to stay ideal at the higher flow rate conditions, but you have to have the higher flow rate conditions to get from a poor angle of reaction to an ideal angle of reaction. So it starts producing a high amount of shaft work to rotate your compressor that is constantly trying to absorb everything the turbine is doing. So that kind of makes sense, right? We can increase the pressure. So we can increase the pressure, which increases the force. This also increases the density of the gas, because if you increase the pressure, you're feeding into here. You increase the pressure in your tank, your turbine housing, what that means is you're putting more in there and it's compressing. So the mass increases as well as the velocity increases. If you just increase the mass through increasing fuel delivery, it's not as quick to go inefficient, I guess, if that makes sense. And we'll have to we'll look at turbine maps on the next one because it's already getting kind of long. But say I'm injecting 2 pounds of fuel a minute, and I go and I inject 4 pounds of fuel a minute, right? That's an increase in the mass of the turbine, and as such, you get more boost pressure, as long as the turbine can consume it. So stuff to consider is like when this happens, so diesel stuff, this isn't like too crazy out there, but if you look at like a guy going from gasoline at 14.7 to 1, 14.6 to 1, and then going to methanol at 5 to 1 or 4 to 1, the amount of fuel per minute goes up fast. You always hear people say that methanol spools turbochargers. There you go, right? You just increase the mass to the turbine wheel, which if we go back to our equation, actually I think this is even a better one to look at. If we go back here, right, changing only the mass flow and not the expansion ratio, we go from 620 kilowatts to 1241 kilowatts of shaft work. Think about that. This is not taken into consideration whether the turbine wheel can handle it. If you increase the mass, you do increase the pressure because the mass is taking up space and everything's hot. So these are, you can really get into the weeds with this stuff and really kind of get crazy with it, but this is really how to look at it in more simplistic terms to go over why it happens that way and how it works that way. And then the next one we'll do turbine maps, and then I think after that we can go back to looking at the compound stuff. because in compounds you have two ERs in the system. You have the expansion ratio through charger 1, and then you have the expansion ratio through charger 2 to take into consideration as to how it's working. And that's really important because what happens, remember, when if you have an interstage drive, what happens is your pressure in the interstage tube reduces the rate here if you don't account for it and increase the pressure free manifold turbocharger to take into consideration that. And this is also why big like S400 compounds work. If anybody's, because you might be like looking at all this stuff, right? And like, well, if we have to have this split in the turbochargers, how come like S4s or GT55 compounds work? Mass. Essentially, you can start trading off you don't need the big pressure drops to create the velocity to do the turbine work. You can use mass flow through both chargers to create the turbine work because the turbines are finally starting to get big enough where they don't need a big expansion ratio number to generate the energy because they can trade off the big expansion ratio for mass flow. The catch-22 is nobody wants to tow a trailer with compound S400s, right? The majority of us don't. Yeah, sure. Obviously, anything is possible. But it's not ideal because it can't get the pressure up fast because the restriction, the turbine wheel, can't create a high expansion ratio rapidly. They tend to be fairly lazy, right? So you don't see them except for in racing. But that's how, because I was confused by this for a little bit, because I've been doing this with the small turbochargers, and the small turbochargers are real particular on what the atmospheric charger's turbine side flows, depending on the design of the turbine housing and turbine wheel of the manifold charger. So, divided housings like a different atmo than non-divided housings. It's like a really short way to put it. You could screw this completely up and make that a false statement, but that's kind of what I've noticed, and it has to do with expansion ratio, gas velocities, the ability to move mass, the ability to move volume, and move that efficiently through the turbine wheel. Because the turbine wheel's efficiency, remember, is let's see this. Turbine wheel's efficiency is like this. So it's not a, and this will be mass. This is and this line equals kilowatts or whatever you want to measure it as. As its speed increases and the mass increases, it gets more and more efficient, and a lot of this has to do with angle of reaction and the turbulent state across the turbine wheel, as well as the amount of energy it's being fed versus the amount of energy it can turn into work. So it gets better and gets better, and then it starts getting fast. Your angle of reaction lays over, gets not happy, as well as your gas velocity versus the velocity of the blade. It's starting to become non-ideal, and it starts to produce less work. And like somewhere in here on a lot of diesel stuff, you get to the point where like it won't make any more boost. Like that's it. I've increased. I put bigger injectors in it, or I put a little bit bigger compressor in it, or I did this or did that. That's because the consumption, the compressor wheel is consuming equal to or more than turbine power. So that's what's happening, right? The power produced by a turbine versus power consumed by compressor are at a wash. And there's a lot of, sometimes you can make the compressor bigger to fix this, sometimes not. Every time you can make the turbine bigger, usually to fix this. because it's that's your paddle boat. But sometimes making the compressor bigger fixes this because the compressor is in such a state of disarray as far as its flow field goes. It's just consuming everything, but not moving a lot of volume. So making the compressor larger can fix this. And then other times, no. And the turbine needs to get bigger, or you can make the housing bigger. But the housing is kind of like a fine to medium adjustment. It's not going to be as drastic as the turbine wheel. But it's really good to like get close. Like your turbine wheel and compressor wheel are your rough adjustment that roughs you in, that gets you close, and then you're going to adjust the turbine housing um, to get that dialed in. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. I don't think we got too crazy. We really didn't do any equations. We just displayed equations and their outputs, and then some really bad handwriting and pen drawing. But this is what I do. I reshape these components to mainly increase the flow into this channel. So through understanding pressure drops and looking at turbulent states on the turbine wheels when they come in, as well as turbulent states on compressor wheels when they come in, and then make adjustments to increase this channel usage. You're never using all of this channel ever, ever. That's an ideal condition, and we live on Earth. So you get, I like, best case, right? It's just bad right there, and everything else is being used. But there's stuff going on all over the place. It pulls the gas off the roof. It'll shoot the gas off the short side. It's always not happy, and the goal is just to make it a little bit, find little things to make it a little bit better to deliver better parts, better product, or solve problems. A lot of times it's not selling a brand new charger. It's taking a charger in from an owner and looking at what it appears to be doing through their data as well as traces on the flow surfaces, and then making an uh, educated guess on what's going to make it better to do what the customer is asking for: more power, maybe more response, or maybe more response inside of a certain RPM window, or more power inside of a certain RPM window, or same power, but we want the motor to go higher RPM wise. Um, that's all stuff that owners are looking for, and those are things that get considered. And if they can be done, you usually try to, or at least learn from it. Either mess it up, make it the same, or make it better. So thank you. You have a good one.